Once upon a time, there lived a husband and wife who had long wished for a child. They had a small house with a little garden behind it, but the garden was so perfectly kept and so carefully locked away that no one in the neighborhood dared to enter. It belonged to a powerful enchantress who was feared for her temper and her magic. One season, the wife became pregnant at last. Her husband was overjoyed, and for a while everything seemed peaceful. But as the months passed, the wife began to grow pale and weak. She lost her appetite for ordinary food, and soon she craved only one thing. From the window, she could see into the enchantress's garden. There, growing in neat beds, was a bright green plant with tender leaves. Rapunzel. It looked fresh and crisp, sparkling with dew in the morning light. One day the wife said, in a strained voice, "If I don't eat some of that Rapunzel, I think I will die." Her husband was alarmed. "Don't talk like that," he begged. "I'll find you something else." But the wife shook her head. "Nothing else will do," she whispered. "Only Rapunzel." The husband loved her deeply. Seeing her grow weaker each day, he finally made a desperate decision. Late at night, when the neighborhood was silent, he climbed over the high wall into the enchantress's garden. He hurried to the Rapunzel bed, pulled up a handful, and ran back the way he came. He washed the leaves and gave them to his wife, and she ate as if she had been starving. For a day or two she seemed stronger, but the craving returned, even fiercer than before. "I need more," she said. "More than last time." The husband hesitated. He knew he was risking his life, but her eyes were pleading, and fear for her overcame fear for himself. That night he climbed the wall again. He had barely gathered the Rapunzel when a cold voice cut through the darkness. "So," said the enchantress, stepping out from the shadows, "a thief in my garden." The man froze. The moonlight fell on the enchantress's face, and it was hard as stone. "Please," he stammered, falling to his knees, "forgive me. I took it only because my wife is with child and has such a craving that she will not live without it. I meant no disrespect." The enchantress watched him without pity. Then she said slowly, "If you are telling the truth, I will allow you to take as much Rapunzel as you want, on one condition." "Any condition?" the husband said quickly. "You must give me the child." The enchantress replied, "When your wife delivers, the baby will belong to me. I will care for it, and it will lack for nothing." The husband's heart stopped. But he imagined his wife dying, and his mind went numb with fear. He could not think of any other way. He whispered, "Yes." The enchantress smiled, satisfied. She let him go, and the husband carried home the Rapunzel with shaking hands. In time, the wife gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The moment the child was born, the enchantress appeared, as if she had been waiting just outside the door. She took the baby without hesitation. The parents cried and pleaded, but the enchantress would not be moved. "You agreed," she said. "She is mine." And so the enchantress carried the baby away and named her Rapunzel. Rapunzel grew into a child as bright as morning light, gentle, curious, and sweet. The enchantress raised her, but not with warmth. She treated Rapunzel as something precious to possess, not a person to love. As Rapunzel became older and more beautiful, the enchantress's fear of the world grew stronger, and her desire to keep the girl hidden became an obsession. When Rapunzel reached her 12th year, the enchantress decided it was time to lock her away forever. Deep in the forest stood a tall tower. It had no door and no staircase, only a single window near the top. The enchantress brought Rapunzel there and made her lie alone in the tower room. The room was clean and airy, with a bed, a chair, and a small table. But it was a prison, and the forest below was thick and silent. Rapunzel's hair was extraordinary, long, golden, and heavy like spun silk. It grew and grew until it trailed far beyond her feet. The enchantress visited often, but she never climbed the tower. Instead, she stood below the window and called, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair!" Rapunzel would sit at the window, gather her long hair, braid it into a thick rope, and drop it down. The enchantress would climb up as easily as if she were climbing a ladder. When she left, she climbed down the same way, and Rapunzel's window went quiet again. Alone for so many days, Rapunzel learned to fill her time with song. Her voice was clear and pure, and it traveled through the trees like a spell of its own. Birds came to listen. Even the wind seemed to pause when she sang. Years passed. One day a prince rode through the forest. He had been hunting with his men, but he became separated from them and found himself on a narrow path he did not recognize. As he searched for the right direction, he heard music drifting above him, so beautiful that it stopped him in his tracks. He followed the sound through the trees until he reached the tall tower. He looked up and saw the window high above, but he could not see the singer clearly. Still, the voice filled him with wonder. He circled the tower, searching for a door, but there was none. He searched for a staircase, but there was only smooth stone. He returned the next day, and the next, hoping to understand the mystery. At last he saw the enchantress approach the tower. He hid behind a tree and watched. The enchantress called, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair!" A thick braid of golden hair fell from the window, and the enchantress climbed up. The prince's eyes widened. When the enchantress left, he waited until she was gone. Then he stepped forward, heart pounding, and called in as exact an imitation as he could manage. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair!" For a moment, nothing happened. Then the braid fell. The prince climbed quickly, his hands trembling on the thick rope of hair. When he reached the window and stepped inside, Rapunzel screamed in fright. She had never seen a man before, and the sudden presence of a stranger terrified her. "Please," the prince said quickly, "do not be afraid. I heard your singing from the forest, and it drew me here. I had to find the voice that could make the trees themselves listen." Rapunzel stared at him. He did not look cruel. His eyes were kind, and his voice was gentle. Her fear softened into curiosity. They spoke, cautiously at first, then more freely. Rapunzel told him she had lived in the tower for as long as she could remember, and that the enchantress visited, but never allowed her to leave. The prince told her of the world beyond the forest, of towns, rivers, fields, music, and people who laughed together in the sun. Rapunzel listened as if someone had opened a window inside her heart. For the first time, she understood how small her world had been. The prince began to visit again and again, always when the enchantress was away. Each time he brought something small: a ribbon, a piece of sweet bread, a story. Rapunzel gave him what she could: flowers from the window box, songs, and the warmth of her company. Soon the prince and Rapunzel realized their feelings were deeper than friendship. The prince said, "I want to take you away from here. I want you to be safe and free." Rapunzel's eyes filled with tears. "I want that too," she whispered. "But how? There is no door." "We will find a way," the prince promised. They made a plan. Each time the prince visited, he would bring a small skein of silk. Rapunzel would weave them together, little by little, into a rope ladder that would be strong enough to hold her weight. When it was finished, they would escape. For a while, everything went well. But one day, without thinking, Rapunzel spoke in front of the enchantress as naturally as she might have spoken to a friend. "Why is it," Rapunzel asked innocently, "that you are so much heavier to pull up than the prince?" The room seemed to freeze. "The prince," the enchantress repeated softly. Rapunzel's face went white. She clapped her hand over her mouth, but it was too late. The enchantress's expression turned dark. "So," she said, in a voice that was quiet and terrifying, "you have been entertaining visitors." Rapunzel fell to her knees. "Please," she cried. "I didn't mean." But the enchantress's anger had already spilled over into action. She seized Rapunzel's long hair, and with a flash of cold magic, she cut it off. Great golden lengths falling to the floor like severed sunlight. Then she spoke words that made the air sting. Rapunzel was torn from the tower and cast into a wild, lonely place. Some tell it as a desert, others as a distant wasteland, where winds blew harshly and days were long. There she was forced to survive alone, far from any help, with only her own courage to keep her standing. That same evening the prince came, as he always did. He called from below, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair!" And the braid fell. But it was not Rapunzel's living hair. It was the cut hair, tied to the window as a trap. The prince climbed up eagerly, expecting Rapunzel's smile. Instead, he found the enchantress waiting in the tower room, her eyes glittering with triumph. "You will never see her again," the enchantress said coldly. "Your little bird has flown." The prince staggered back as if struck. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Far away," the enchantress replied. "Where you cannot reach her." Grief and shock overwhelmed him. In despair, he stumbled backward toward the window, and not seeing where he stepped, fell from the tower. He did not die, but he landed terribly, and in some tellings the thorns and branches below injured his eyes, so that he could not see. Blind and broken, hearted, he wandered for a long time through forests and fields, calling Rapunzel's name into the wind, guided only by hope and memory. Meanwhile, Rapunzel endured her exile. Days turned into months. She learned to find water, to shelter from storms, to keep moving even when loneliness pressed on her like weight. Her hair, though cut, began to grow again. She held on to one thought, that somewhere in the world the prince still lived, and that if she stayed alive, she might someday find him. At last, after long wandering, fate brought them close. One day Rapunzel heard a voice in the distance, hoarse, tired, but familiar in a way that made her heart leap. She followed the sound, and through the harsh landscape, she saw a man walking slowly, hands stretched out as if feeling the air. He was thinner and older, looking from suffering, but she knew him at once. "Prince!" she cried. He stopped, trembling. "Rapunzel," he whispered, as if afraid the sound was a dream. Rapunzel ran to him and took his hands. He touched her face gently, and his breath caught. "It's you," he said, voice breaking. "I thought I had lost you forever." Rapunzel wept. Her tears fell onto his wounded eyes. In the old tale, those tears, born of true love and long pain, had a healing power. The prince blinked, and slowly the darkness lifted. He began to see again, first light and shadow, then Rapunzel's face, blurred but real, then clear at last. They held each other for a long time, saying everything and nothing, because joy can be too large for words. The prince brought Rapunzel back to his kingdom. There she was welcomed, not as a prisoner of a tower, but as a young woman who had survived hardship with strength. In time they married, and the kingdom celebrated with music and bright banners. And Rapunzel, who had once known only stone walls and a single window, lived at last in a world wide enough for her voice to travel anywhere it pleased. Without fear, without chains, and without ever being locked away again.